Yeah, you can take me there.
What is up, guys? Welcome back to another GeekaWhat video. In this video, I'm going to be building an awesome $800 gaming PC build for 2022. I'll be covering off all the components that make this system possible, showing you how you can pick them up in budget in the current climate. I'll also be showing you how to build the system from start right through to finish, before installing our Windows, drivers, and of course, some of our favourite games, testing those out later too. This is a really cracking build for 1080p gaming that doesn't break the bank and has really great upgrade paths. So let's do this, and let's kick things off by taking a look at the CPU, motherboard, and RAM to begin with, installing as many of the components outside of the case as we possibly can. Now, for the motherboard and CPU combo, I've gone for the Intel Core i5-11400F and a B560M Aorus Elite from Gigabyte. Now, this Intel 11400F chip is a little bit on the older side now, but rivals something like a Ryzen 5 5600X at a lower price point and without any included graphics. It's also a lot cheaper than some of Intel's new offerings, many of which require DDR5 memory, expensive in itself to get going. This is a great value CPU and won't bottleneck even up to like an RTX 3060 Ti, making future system upgrades very, very plausible. If you open up the motherboard box, you'll be greeted, of course, with the motherboard itself, and of course a few key features on this board which are worth keeping in mind. At the core of the board, we obviously have the CPU socket needed for these 11th gen CPUs. We've got 4 RAM DIMM slots, very, very important, and means you can get dual channel memory performance if you want it. You've also then got a pair of M.2 slots. This allows you to install an NVMe SSD without any hassle for fast storage, Gen 4 as well, so the latest standard. And at the rear of the board, we also have this lovely built-in I/O shield. It makes the build process a little bit easier, and I think it also looks visually a bit better. All in all, it's a great board. Doesn't support CPU overclocking, but does support overclocking of the memory, which is actually the important one from a performance perspective. Locate the golden triangle on the processor. For us, it's just here in this corner. And we want to match this up with the triangle on the bottom left corner of the CPU socket. Pull out the arm and then pull up the socket cover. Drop the CPU very gently into place like so, and then secure the arm back down. That basically means our CPU's installed, and there's not really much more we need to do here. Now is also a great time to install the RAM or the memory that comes with this build. So I've gone for this XPG kit, specifically it's their Spectrix D45G, and it looks bloody gorgeous. We're going to pop it in the 2nd and the 4th RAM DIMM slots by pulling back the clips on either side. XPG logo should face outwards, and then we can slide it into the slot. The gold contact strip will then clip in nicely to the black RAM DIMM slot, and we're going to repeat this stage for as many RAM DIMMs as we have. We've got 2, so just the 2 slots for us, 2nd and 4th, and that's going to give us that lovely dual channel memory bonus. We can also go ahead at this point of the build and install the storage. Now this right here is XPG's S40G. We've done a full written review over on GeekaWhat.com, which I implore you to go and check out. Basically, with speeds in the region of 3 gigabytes per second, it works very, very well indeed. To install this drive, you simply then need to go ahead and slide it into the top slot at a 45-degree angle. So it basically should sort of shimmy in. We can then push the drive down and secure it with one of the included standoff screws you get with your motherboard. Boards like this will often also have M.2 heatsinks on them, but we don't need one, as our RGB heat spreader that's built in obviously looks great, so you don't want to cover it up, and it will do a good job of keeping the drive cool too. The final component then to go ahead and install onto the motherboard before we start worrying about the case and the other components today is the CPU cooler. Now, one disadvantage of these Intel chips is that the included cooler you get, if any, is absolutely crap. The AMD one is much, much better. Thankfully, that can be solved with the purchase of a Cooler Master Hyper 212 RGB Black Edition or comparable budget cooler. Though to be honest with you, Cooler Master excel in this department. Their range of budget coolers, specifically the 212 lineup, is just unrivaled as far as price to performance goes. Inside the cooler's box, you get a range of things included. First of all is, of course, the cooler itself, with the fan pre-installed. We will be using the fan, of course, later to channel fresh air through the cooler, but for now, we want to pull it off, as it is just going to get in the way. You'll also find yourself with an included box of installation hardware. In here, you'll find 2 additional fan mounts. If you wanted to put another fan on the other side for push-pull, you can do that. As well as, of course, a fan splitter. So if you do add a second fan, you can plug them both in. Really nice of Cooler Master to include those, especially the fan splitter. Always good to see. And then you'll find a bigger bag with all of your extra mounting hardware in. Now, this is actually all of the mounting hardware you'll need for all different types of CPUs. So don't worry if you've got loads of things left over at the end. That's exactly what should happen. Now, for the cooler, you are going to have to take a dent in your pride. And you're going to have to grab the manual and actually take a look and check how you should go about installing the cooler for your specific CPU. So for us, we've got the Intel section. Always great to see. And we need to first start off by taking a look at the backplate. Now, this is the backplate you'll use for both AMD and Intel. For Intel CPUs, you want the scaffolding side of the backplate facing the motherboard, and we're going to use the smaller of the paired mounts on each corner to actually pop our screws and our stoppers through. Once you've popped them through the backplate, you're then going to pop this through the holes on your motherboard that come stock, and then add on the female to female screws to not only hold the backplate into place, but give us some mounting points to fasten the cooler itself down to. Once we've done that, we then need to grab these brackets here. We're going to actually screw these onto the bottom contact plate of the cooler. Once we've screwed them onto the cooler, we can then add a drop of thermal paste onto the CPU and fasten the cooler down on top of the 4 holes we just installed. These brackets will basically clamp the cooler itself to the backplate and the motherboard, keeping your CPU nice and chilly. Don't be too hasty though, we're going to leave the fan off for now and add it back on a bit later. Once the motherboard assembly is complete then, we can go ahead and pop it into the case choice today. This right here. The Tecware Nexus M2, and it's one of the nicest budget cases I've seen in a while. Support for micro ATX motherboards, full-size ATX power supplies. You also get decent support as well for GPUs, about 300mm, 30cm, so even the slightly longer 3060, 70 series cards should be A-OK. With a good amount of ventilation down the side of the case, a hinged tempered glass side panel, and USB 3 on the front panel. This is a cracking case if you're looking for something cheap, cheerful, and really quite nice. It also should have enough room for our built-in CPU cooler, I hope. Now I come to think of it, that could be a little bit tight, but I guess there's only one way to find out. Open up your tempered glass side panel, pull it off the hinges, and then we can go ahead and install the motherboard much more easily. It often makes sense to lay the case down flat for this stage as well, as then you're not fighting gravity as well as any screws or motherboard weight to actually install it into place. Before installing the motherboard into the case, you want to do a quick check by locating all of the holes through the motherboard itself. These should then match up with the holes in your case, and then we can slide the I/O through the rear panel and screw the board down. I guess this is also a moment of truth time as far as a CPU cooler is concerned as well, so quite high stakes in this compact little case. Side panel's going back on, but all importantly, will it close? Here we go. Oh, just about. There are millimeters in it. If you're wondering, does the Tecware Nexus case fit a 212 Evo? Yes, it does. Oh, hallelujah. Now is also a very good time as well to pop on your CPU cooler fan back into place. It's a little bit of a squeeze, especially with this memory, and you will have to push it down a little bit to make sure it sits flush. But otherwise, that's basically it. We'll cable manage those cables away a little bit later. Because first, we've actually got a graphics card to install, one of the most exciting components of any build, and of course the most contentious of all the components at the moment. Finding a GPU you can actually buy, let alone buying one, has been so much of a challenge over the last year and a half. And it's made the videos we make here on the channel so difficult to put together. Now, the 1660 Super is a great option. On the used market, you won't pay ludicrously more for it as you will something like a 3070 or 3080. Don't get me wrong, they're by no means cheap and cheerful as they were 2 years ago. But they still provide great 1080p gaming performance at what I like to think to be a more achievable, realistic price point than some of the other options on the market. This particular MSI version has a gorgeous 2-fan design with a nice metal backplate and plenty of bells and whistles. It's also crucially under the 300mm length threshold for our case today, allowing us to install it without too many problems. What we do need to do is we need to remove the screw on the rear, a little something like this, and that will reveal our 4 rear PCIe slot covers. We need to remove the top 2 slot covers, which you can do by simply giving them a little bit of a wiggle repeatedly, and they will pop out of place. More expensive cases, you just unscrew these rather than having to snap them out. But in all honesty, it's a pretty easy sacrifice to make if you're looking to save some cash and still pick up a pretty nice chassis. Repeat this stage for all of your covers you need removing. For us, it is the top two as it's a double slot card, as most GPUs are. What we then want to do is install it into the top PCIe slot. It might be worth just pivoting the case towards yourself a little bit. We're going to locate the PCIe slot, push back the retention clip, and then slide the GPU into place. Hover it over your silver connector, snap it in, and that's basically it. We do need to give it power, but we'll do that in just a second when we go ahead and install the power supply. Before that though, you do need to screw your GPU into place. We're going to do this by just locating the screw hole at the rear, screwing it in nice and easily, and that will hold the card into place. Repeat this obviously for as many screws as you need on your particular GPU. 1 or 2 for this card is going to be more than adequate, and then we can return the PCIe cover back on. You know what? That's actually a really nice looking build. Really well proportioned as well, with the GPU filling a good portion of the case, the cooler as well. There's not too much dead space in this build, something that I actually quite like to see. Any dead space that is left though, we're going to fill in swiftly with the bequiet PurePower 11. I'm sure that joke has never ever been made before. And maybe I should in fact just be quiet because it was awful. Now this is a 600 watt semi-modular unit. What that means is that your core cables, your motherboard and CPU come pre-plugged in, and you can choose using the interface which optional connectors you want to add. Go ahead and then slide your power supply in. I'm worried it might be a bit of a tight squeeze. Oh, no, okay, that was actually way more simple than what I thought it was going to be. And we can fasten it down at the rear before plugging in the CPU power connection, motherboard power cable, and GPU power connections to give everything all the power that it needs. And once they're in, we can go ahead and boot the system up to see just how well it performs, but first, how good it looks in an epic GeekaWhat glam montage. I'll see you in a second for the benchmarks, but first, roll that montage.
Yeah, you can take me there. Yeah, you can take me there.
Now that we've seen just how good the system looks when it's all powered up, you guys know what's coming next. It's time for the all-important gaming benchmarks. On your screen now is a summary of all the different results we were able to gather, but as usual, we'll be diving in title by title to get a much closer look at the system's overall power. Starting off with Apex Legends, here we achieved 106 frames per second, with all of our testing done at 1080 and 1440p. 93 and 77 for the 90 and 99th percentile results gave us consistent results, where the game visually looked fantastic. It was a similarly positive story in Battlefield 2042, where here we achieved 66 frames per second on average at 1080p. 60 and 55 for the 90 and 99th percentile results were pretty strong too, giving us a consistent frame rate that really didn't deviate all that much. Moving on to Call of Duty Modern Warfare next up, and here we achieved 91 frames per second on average, with 83 and 72 for the 90 and 99th percentile results. This system is honestly a beast when it comes to 1080p gaming at a price point that really doesn't break the bank. The lack of DLSS support on the 1660 Super is a bit disappointing, but something that should be remedied with the launch of the new 3050. Moving on next up to the brand new COD Vanguard. Here at 1080p once again we achieved 82 frames per second on average, giving us some really nice consistent results across both of the CODs, Apex Legends and Fortnite, the next title on the list. Here at 1080p competitive settings, render distance set to far, everything else tuned down to low, we achieved 196 frames per second on average. Nearly 200 FPS on this absolutely monstrous budget system. Finally, to wrap things up, we also tested out Forza Horizon 5. The new Forza game performed so well on this machine, with an average frame rate of 98 frames per second. 90 and 99th percentile results were in the region of 95 and 89, once again showing little deviation in the frame rate. With that though, that pretty much wraps it up for not only the benchmarks but the whole video. Make sure to get subscribed if you'd like to see more from us. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.